every great leader has been called crazy and doubted the majority of the time.
Perhaps if someone told me that, I wouldn't have been able to accomplish it, because there's something in entrepreneurial DNA that has to be defiant. Michael Jordan missed over 9,000 shots.
You need to be more interested than interesting.
And I remember doing the same thing and saying, is there a blueprint?
Right.
What do I have to do? Taking one small step after one small step is often overlooked, but required. Must change, because if you want to play for another 14 years, you can't be running sprints every day. It's bad on your knees and ankles. The advice that I have is know who you're listening to and know who to listen to.
This is Dave Meltzer with Entrepreneurs, the Playbook, and I'm here at the greatest stadium ever built and now rebuilt. You can imagine here at SoFi how much money FIFA has to con Mr. Kroenke into doing another reinventing of this stadium. But speaking about reinventing, this guy is an amazing celebrity. He's an influencer. That means he puts people into flow. He's one of the greatest athletes and the greatest player of lacrosse in history, and he's a friend of mine. Paul Rabil, welcome to the Playbook.
Hey man, I'm so happy to be back here with you. We were just recounting our time together 7 or 8 years ago. I had you on my podcast and we did South by together. Now we're at this beautiful venue.
So and we're blessed, and thank you. But I'm a student of the people that I want to understand the most to get me to where I want to be. And one of the things that I've learned from Musk and Jobs and Gates and Einstein, I study a lot, is that they have this idea of connecting dots backwards to get to where they think they want to be, but they're very open-minded. Now that we're a little bit older, coming from where we came from, and I look back, because I've always tried to connect the dots forward, I couldn't imagine two things. One, being where I am today, and two, how I got to where I am today, and if I would know what it would take to get to where I am, if I'd actually do it.
Yeah.
And I see the same thing in you of those greats, that if somebody would have told you when you were 21 years old, here's where you're going to be and this is how you're going to get there, I wonder if you would even believe them. And
No.
then that you won, and if they told you what it was going to take to get there, what do you think your reaction would be as far as doing it?
Perhaps if someone told me that, I wouldn't have been able to accomplish it, because there's something in entrepreneurial DNA that has to be defiant. And how many times we're told no. As athletes, I think why they transition to entrepreneurs really well is the odds of becoming the 1% of the 1% of the 1% at the pro level are so low that along the way, if someone's not telling you directly, you're feeling it semi and subconsciously that probably not going to happen for this guy, And so you're used to taking on that task daily and developing resilience and persistence. So I say all that because it's a great question. I think as I've gotten older, one of my favorite characteristics is curiosity. We can talk more on that,
Yeah.
but that has a lot to do with understanding your past so you can realize what to do in your present and try to aim at your future. So curiosity. And then the second piece is, a lot of my career has been inventive. There wasn't professional lacrosse when I started playing.
Right.
And then there was. And then while I was playing professionally, making $14,000 as the MVP and champion of the league, I was seeing UFC and MLS rise in America and start beginning to ask the question, why aren't we doing that? Would have never thought that I would have built a professional sports league with my brother. And if someone had offered that, I would have told them no, because of thinking, hey, I'd rather own a team in a league that's working than take another, what some would say, insane bet to try to build a better mousetrap. So all of that stuff, I look back in my life with so much gratitude for those that I've learned from and for the persistence and resilience that I've developed through sport, now business.
Yeah, it's crazy. And you have a new book coming out in May, The Way of a Champion.
Which is exactly what we're talking about, essentially.
Exactly. And you talked about curiosity. I have a saying that I love, and my oldest brother told me that when I walked into a hospital. He was doing his residency. I was pre-med as a freshman, and I looked around the hospital and I said, dude, I hate hospitals. And he almost fell over. He's like, Dave, you're pre-med. God knows you're not going to be a professional football player.
Right.
Like, literally, you need to be more interested than interesting. And that was the core of creativity and curiosity for me, that it shifted my mindset. Even when I switched to being, or thinking I'd want to be a lawyer, I was more interested. I was curious about, like, I wanted to make a lot of money by my house, so I only went to the law school that was going to pay me the most money when I graduated.
Yeah.
Because it was aligned with what I wanted.
Totally.
And I see you having that same, being more interested, even with the fame and the pursuit of your potential. You still, even where other people may have been satisfied, you were constantly being more curious.
Yeah.
And in that aspect of a way of a champion, how much is that a common denominator, that interest, when they could be so interesting?
It's the bedrock of the book. I think intellectual curiosity is like nutrition to me. I derive as much value in that as I do drinking water and eating breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's always been that way for me. I used to think of it as pure work ethic as I was an athlete, and now as I revisit the routines that I did against the wall and out on the field, they were thinking about practice drills differently. So they're creative and curious. I would watch what, the European shooting coaches in basketball were training Dirk Nowitzki to do, off-balance shooting, and say, maybe I should try some off-balance shooting in lacrosse. So the book is some of my personal experiences, but mostly lessons from the great athletes, artists, and entrepreneurs in the world that I have studied, that I've been fortunate to meet over time, that I've journaled about for 15 years, and tried to compile it as if I was speaking to that question we always get: what would you tell your 12-year-old self? And that is building, to my best ability, a manual of lessons, where a lot of people come to us and others, and I remember doing the same thing and saying, is there a blueprint?
Right.
What do I have to do? The reality is there's never a blueprint, but there's history and there are lessons, and there's a range of lessons. I'll give you an example. The two best footballers of all time, Pele and Tom Brady. One won 3 World Cups, the other won 7 Super Bowls. Before games, Pele lays on a bench, puts a cold towel over his eyes, and meditates. And he tries to calm his nerves and realize the ball hitting his foot and going in the back of the net. Tom Brady, in pregame locker rooms, uses anger. He creates a sense of heightened emotion, and in some cases, a little bit of fear and spite. And he uses that energy and heightened emotion to play the way that he does. Couldn't be opposite ways, but two of the greatest. So are you one or the other, or somewhere in between? What matters is you find what is authentic to your approach. And I've sort of done that exploration as well and try to put it all into a book.
And you do such a great job in articulating that. Now, one of the things I've learned about lessons, and I get a reminder every month, I get a $1,200 bill for a storage facility that has banker boxes of all the notes that I took from undergrad, law school, business school, $1 million of personal development that I've invested in. And I'm sure there's great ideas in there.
Yeah.
But I've learned one thing about lessons, and we're both in that subscription of life's about lessons. The lessons will keep on coming until you learn them. Is that I've learned to only capture the lessons that resonate with me. That combining intellect with intuition for inspiration, which is what you were talking about, Tom Brady and Pele, one of those, or a combination thereof, or in between in the spectrum, something's going to resonate with you, which only occurs through curiosity or interest as we articulate them differently. What are some of the lessons that resonate with you in your own book that we know aren't? 10% of the people are going to think, no matter what, everything you say is genius. 10% are going to hate you, Paul.
Yeah.
Like they do me.
I think that's more.
Right?
Me.
Okay.
50%.
Well, that's just because you played against so many guys and they hate you for beating them. But in between, there's that spectrum of like, I agree with part of this and that. But for you, in the way of a champion, what are some of those lessons that really resonate with you?
Well, maybe I'll share ideas around 2 chapters. But the first is what I have always gotten from studying other great athletes and entrepreneurs and entertainers is there's an aspirational connection. I get told by parents, hey, Paul, I tell my son or daughter to eat their vegetables first, and they ignore me. But when you say it on your YouTube channel, they get excited and ask me about what vegetables we're eating for dinner. And I'm like, wow, what a fortunate position that I can be in. I was them at one point. And so that connection, I think, is important as storytellers to leverage, right? And so that's part one. Now, the two of the lessons I'll share with you. One is a chapter called The Greats Lose a Lot. And understanding that, hey, these world-class performers, they don't win all the time. That's not what separates them. They're not more gifted and have this mentality that supersedes everyone, and that's always been there, and that's why they're great. No, they've actually learned how to handle loss more than everyone else, and they turn that loss into learning. They develop thicker resilience, and then they turn it around. So Bill Belichick, the second losingest coach all time in NFL history, 8 Super Bowls. Peyton Manning has the record for most interceptions thrown as a rookie, 28. Michael Jordan missed over 9,000 shots. Mark Zuckerberg had one of the greatest falls in public market history, losing over $1 billion in market cap in one day. And you've seen what he's built with Meta. Metallica had flops. Vincent van Gogh never sold a painting while he was alive. And I sort of like the list goes on and on. Cy Young blew the most saves of anyone. Martin Brodeur's given up the most goals. Like, these are the icons, and they've lost a lot. So that, I think, is both relatable to all of us and hopefully motivational, And then the second one I would say is it's a chapter called Plant Little Acorns. It's more in the third portion of my book where I talk about the afterlife of sports, which is more about service and business and relationships. And the idea, kind of on the heels of your first question, that who would have thought my career would have trajected the way that it did? I actually wouldn't have wanted it to. I would have liked to have walked into professional lacrosse and get paid $1 million and just focused on that because I loved it. But my first acorn planted was starting a Facebook page. And I started a Facebook page because pro lacrosse wasn't on TV. And that was a medium that I could afford because it was free and leverage as a broadcast tool. I never thought that what would ensue in building all of these social platforms and audiences, that would be essentially our unlock when we did launch the PLL, right? I never understood that showing up to sports psychology and then showing up to personal therapy would help build my relationship with my brother Mike, who I ended up co-founding the PLL with. And they say, don't mix family and business. So taking one small step after one small step is often overlooked, but required.
One of the other requirements that I found beyond the desire that you must be what you can be is what I call, we have to be annoying in order as a way of being a champion. And when I say that, whether you're a parent, associate, whatever role or identity you want to take for certain subject matter topics or expertise, the two facets of being really annoying is one, being truthful, and two, being repetitive. Mm-hmm. But that's how human beings, you spoke of all these greats, and I've been blessed on this podcast. I think I've done 1,800 of these since we met last. But I've learned a lot that all these people are annoying in two ways.
Yeah.
That they're not only honest as best as they can be with others, but with themselves, which gets really annoying. Nobody wants to know, including you, the truth. And then two, it's the repetition that is really annoying because each time you repeat something, it's a different layer of awareness.
Yeah.
It elevates this vibration or frequency, and nothing beyond being truthful is more annoying to others than keep on repeating yourself for their own benefit, wanting it more than you.
Totally.
In the book, do you address anything related to the fact that you have to be honest or you have to be repetitive?
Oh yeah, all the time. And I wish I could rewrite one of the chapters to you have to be annoying.
Yeah.
So the way that it's structured, one of my favorite books was written by Marcus Aurelius called Meditations.
Yeah.
And current authors whom I love are, Young Pueblos, Diego Perez, Rick Rubin's Creative Act. These are all short form chapters with lessons. That was my inspiration. So there's 220 chapters. They're all a page, and each of them have a lesson like you just shared. And I find that the most digestible. Talk about authenticity for me as a reader. And the best we can do as creatives is share what works for us. Related to being a pest, that nets out for me, and I'm often trying to soften it when I send a note to my publisher or send a note to my DP or, executives on our management team. I'm like, sorry for being annoying. What's the update?
Right, exactly.
So that's part one. And
what's coming next when you get sorry for being annoying.
Yeah, something annoying.
Right.
Yeah. And then the way that I've processed learning, and I have a feeling that you've done the same based on what we've shared over our time, is it's a cycle for me. I first ingest, whether that's through hearing or reading or seeing a visual. Oh gosh, it's sort of like lightning rod moment. And then for me to begin to store it, I write it down. So that's why journaling has been so important. That starts to lock the thought process in. The last piece, which I learned through really my tutoring program and this R&D class I took in high school, is when you're forced to teach that material that you just learned or share it with someone else, that's like such a jarring experience. The first half of this podcast, I've probably practiced in my head, not knowing you were going to ask any of these questions, and then shared them with kids over time and my peers, and it gets better and better and a little bit more smooth and coherent. So that process of sharing what you've learned, it's a rocky road, so don't be too critical on yourself. But that, to me, locks it into long-term memory, and that's when you can advance in whatever it is you're aiming at.
One of the things that I love about our bonding and relationship is we're both students. We're constantly studying different things, people, places, things, situations, historical events that determine human nature, because that will never change, and you can only learn that from historical relevances and references. In the context of learning and being a student, that we have to find in the search for either, this old saying bothers me, you're the aggregate of the 5 people you surround and spend the most time with.
You hear it everywhere.
Right. It's too general. And what I have found through all of the thousands of interviews and I wish it was intercourse, but it's unfortunately just verbal interaction. But what I found is that the way to being a champion is to know by subject matter, topic, or expertise. For example, PLL or lacrosse, that's one of your expertise, not mine.
Yeah.
So for athletics, for me, because of my skills and knowledge, I had a very low basement athletically. I derived a championship perspective by being a really good 6-man. Right? I was with my college football coach, and he's like, I used to say, hey, I learned the most by being a average Division III football player. And my college coach said, actually, Dave, you were below average. And I said, okay, even better, because what I learned by the 6-man in that topic has helped me be a champion. But I also was a point guard, an all-star in entrepreneurship and business since I was 5, right? I could sell ice to Eskimos. There was I was born genetically and energetically in that realm of topic. In understanding that, it's important to surround yourself with the right people, the right ideas, but it's not necessarily the aggregate of always being either the 6-man or always being the point guard. How do you address that in your idea of a way to be a champion?
Yeah, well, I do talk about the people you surround yourself with, but I mentioned that because of what we're afforded in today's environment, those people can be authors who are no longer alive. They can be people who run a podcast. They don't have to be out of what some people may think, oh, well, I don't have exposure in my neighborhood or at my age to the people that I want to associate. You can actually go find them and just consume what they're doing more than you do anyone else. So that's part one. And the second is the 6-man. I write about that. I love that the NBA has a 6-man of the year. Manu Ginobili has won it several times, and he's also been an NBA champion and an All-Pro.
Yeah. Like Harden.
I love
James
it.
Harden was original,
exactly.
right? Amazing.
Amazing. And so if you think about it, they are honoring a non-starter, right? And we're in a world where you go from did you make the team to are you starting to are you the best player, right? And did you make the team to starting is like, once you make the team, no one gives a shit. And I think that's a bad experience. And to be able to reward someone who is a crucially impactful player in the game that comes off the bench, which by the way is harder to get in the flow of the game. I say every line of work that you're in, every sport should have a sixth man of the year. And in lacrosse, it would be the fourth midfielder, the second line midfield. And I think those types of people are game changers. And there's no way to start until at some point you were a six man first.
Yeah. Last topic of being a champion, I was saying what other people think is none of my business. And there's so much influence today. I say there's an energy gap between knowing who I am and what I want people to think I am. Yeah. And I think it is amplified by social media. I still think it's always been a problem, whether you're in your church group or a foursome at golf. A lot of people were just worried what people thought they were. And I have learned to know this is what I am and this is what I'm doing to interfere with what I am and where I can be, my potential. In the way to a champion, how much do we have to understand, regulate, or interpret other people's opinion or our own fear of what people think of us?
Oh, it's so critical. I talk about it throughout the journey of the book. So the book is broken into three parts: amateur, professional, and beyond the game. And the amateur lessons are things like work ethic and discipline. And amateur is derived from the Latin phrase amateur, which means enthusiast of or lover.
And enthusiast means with God.
And you exactly. And you just fall in love with what you're doing. And there are lessons around what it takes to then advance to professional, which Stephen Pressfield says there's life before pro and life after pro. We don't talk a lot about what to do once you're pro, and that's why life expectancy for most athletes in any discipline is 2.5 years. Some of the lessons are recurring, others evolve. Like being the hardest worker in the room as an amateur is critical. When you're a professional, the translation from physical work must change, because if you want to play for another 14 years, you can't be running sprints every day. It's bad on your knees and ankles. You get intellectually sharper as your brain and your prefrontal cortex grows through your 20s. And there's ways that you can beat the competition by having game experience. And then beyond the game is service and how you are turning back and helping the next generation. So when it comes to how I think about the journey that we're all on, it is full of criticism. It's full of fear. It's full of critical feedback. And the advice that I have is know who you're listening to and know who to listen to. Those two are critical to have, because we're all going to see negativity and trolling and people telling us that we suck. And being able to just blindly shut that off sort of airs narcissistic,
right,
in a way. Because there is some value. I've had some of my worst seasons in the social media era, and man, I got fucking killed online. And the thought that I would say, oh, they don't know what they're talking about, there's some truth to it. I was 1 for 19 in one game. So I shot like shit. Right. They're right. But then there's the know who to listen to are your inner circle, are analysts, are mentors, coaches. Those are the people that you then sit in a room with confidentially, get vulnerable, say, this is what I'm feeling. And then they say, hey, you've got a really good left-handed shot on the run. And I noticed last season you were mainly sweeping to your right. Why don't we get you to go left? That type of feedback allows us to grow. So we can't shut it all off. Long way of saying it. We have to listen to it, but listen to the source, and the source that we prefer listening to.
I love it. I always say advice is like a handful of sand. if it's not resonating with us or not from someone within this realm of feeding and bleeding, someone that truly is trying to help us, or the correct association or relativity, then you just let the sand fall through and you hold on to that kernel that does.
And I feel for Gen Zs and Gen Alphas, the next generation coming up, because they are truly native to our cell phones and social media. And there have been psych studies that have come out, led by Google and Meta, that suggests that the next generation actually prefers to follow versus lead because it's safer.
Yeah.
You know, leading or standing out, to your point, has always been picked on. If you asked a question in class, someone would say, you know, you're a goody two-shoes or sucking up to the teacher. But like asking questions, that's fucking cool.
Yeah.
You know, and so the next generation really, I think, needs to be understood better and communicated with differently, with a lot more empathy than you and I potentially were, because we didn't have that bothersome or that worry. We just got to say, right, I want to do this, and I'm going to say I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to go do it, and I'll stand out, and I can shut off the noise because there isn't a mobile device buzzing in my pocket every 2 seconds. So I think we need to do a better job of mentoring and coaching and teaching the next generation.
Yeah, especially about people thinking you're nuts, crazy, or you can't do it. You are only limited, and I think of Paul Rabil when I think of this, you're only limited by your own self-image, and we need to increase that self-image if people today are learning to follow and to derive joy and passion through following, then we're limiting our self-image. And every great leader has been called crazy and doubted the majority of the time. Yeah. They haven't been supported, and that doesn't happen unless we elevate the self-image of Gen Alpha, our next generation, and it's so important. One of the other things in this book, because I know Paul Rabil and have studied him and do so still, is that he pursues systems, not outcomes. And I think the way to be a champion is to study the systems of those who have been before us, and those, as you say, are so accessible today. Like to think that I have access to Einstein. Yeah. Right. I have access, even Walter Isaacson is one of my favorite, to understand the entire picture of a champion in a variety of different spaces is incredible. And whether it's podcasts or books or live interviews and fireside chats or whatever we're doing, find the people that resonate with you. Find people that sit in the situation you want to be in. Your champions. You don't have, my champions are not your champions, but I promise you there'll be common threads between those champions. And if you want to learn the way of the champion, if you want to study the system, not the outcome of being a champion, then buy this book. It's out May 7th. He's an incredible entrepreneur. He's an unbelievable entertainer and even a better athlete. You have it all. He's a five-tool player. That's Paul Rabil. Check him out everywhere, especially his book. Pre-order it. It'll be everywhere. The Way of a Champion. I want to thank my champion here at the greatest stadium ever built. What a apropos place to be. This is David Meltzer with Paul Rabil on Entrepreneurs, the Playbook.